Hi everybody, and welcome to the Goizueta How to Conquer the GRE webinar session. My name is Stephanie Espy, and I am an alum of Goizueta, class of 2008 MBA. I'm also the founder of MathSP, Academic and Test Prep Coaching. You can learn more about MathSP at www.mathsp.com. And today we're here to talk about some strategies for conquering the GRE. As you know, the GRE is one of the admissions exams that is your choice to take between the GRE and the GMAT. And just to give you some background, we're going to talk about the overview of the GRE, how it's scored. We're going to get into some strategies for how to prepare for the GRE. We'll go through some sample questions, both quantitative and verbal. And then we'll end with a study plan to optimize your scores. And lastly, let you know a little bit more about the options we have at MathSP. All right, so the content of the GRE is one that hopefully you're familiar with by now if you're listening to this webinar. So there is a 60-minute writing section, and that's two 30-minute prompts. We won't get into much of that today, but certainly look over that yourself, looking at the official GRE practice test book. That's what I'm going to be using today. And then there is a 60-minute verbal reasoning section, again, divided into two different sections. Also, there's two quantitative reasoning sections, 70 minutes total, 35 minutes apiece. The structure is those separately timed sessions, totaling 3 hours and 45 minutes. So prepare to plan to take the test and make sure that you're studying in an environment where you're giving yourself that amount of time to kind of pace yourself through. You do get a 10-minute break, and then there's also an unscored section as well as a research section. The research section is always at the end of the test, and it will be labeled for you. The unscored section could be either quantitative or verbal, and that section is not marked, so you won't know if it's unscored or not. So the idea there is that you treat that section as if it's a real part of the test and that it is actually scored. This is a computer adaptive test. It's section adaptive, so like I said earlier, you have two quantitative sections and you have two verbal sections. The first one is pretty right at the mid-level of the scoring range, and the second section depends on how you do with the first section. So for example, if you score really highly on the first quantitative section, your second section will be adaptive to that first section, and you'll get harder questions for the second section because you're scoring the higher range. Same for verbal reasoning. The first section is pretty middle of the pack, and then depending on how you do with the first section, your second section will be harder or around the same difficulty or even easier, just based on how you performed on the first section. So it is section adaptive testing. And there is an on-screen calculator provided for the quantitative part of the test. So you do have that available to you in the top right corner of your screen. You'll see the scoring is from 0 to 6 for writing section. For the verbal and the quantitative, the lowest is 130 and the highest is 170. If you're also considering studying for the GMAT, keep in mind that the scoring is very different on the two exams. The structure is somewhat similar, but the way the test works is very different. So make sure that you watch the video, the webinar we've done before about the GMAT, and compare the two to one another. Okay, so here's an overview of the verbal part of the test. There's 3 different question types in the verbal section. The first one is your reading comprehension question type. This question type will ask you to read the passage and then answer questions pertaining to the passage. Different questions you'll see include detailed questions, you'll see inference questions, main idea questions, author style and tone, so different variety of questions pertaining to the passage. The next question type is the text completion. We'll see some examples of that later on in our session today. This question type is asking you to choose words to fill in the blank. So you're given either 1, 2, all the way up to 5 sentences, so a short passage, and there's either 1, 2, or 3 blanks in that passage. So your job is to fill in the blank with the correct word that corresponds with that particular blank. And then lastly, sentence equivalence question type. This question type consists of a single sentence in which you have to choose 2 words that give the sentence the same exact meaning. So we'll see some examples of that later on as well. Moving on to the quantitative overview, there's 4 different question types here. So the first one is called quantitative comparison. This is when you're given 2 different columns and you'll have to assess whether the two columns are equal to each other, or whether column A is greater than B, or whether column B is greater than A. And if you cannot determine based on the information provided to you, then you choose choice D, which means the relationship cannot be determined. The second type of question here is multiple choice, one response or one answer. This is your traditional multiple choice question type that has 5 different answer choices and you're choosing the one correct answer. There's also multiple choice with one or more responses or answers. This is where you have a question that you can choose one answer or you can choose one or more answers. So don't be alarmed for this question type if it's just one answer. That's okay, but it may be one or more answers for this question type. And then lastly, numeric entry. And that is the kind of question where there are no choices. You have to answer the question and then input your answer using an integer, a decimal, or a fraction. All right, so what's the best way to prepare for the GRE? So the first step is to research and set your target score. So you should know what your target schools are looking for. So Goizueta, for example, you should know what GRE scores Goizueta is looking for. And then once you know what scores the schools that you're applying to are looking for, you're setting your target score, which is consisting of the scores that most people who apply to those schools are targeting and getting accepted. Keep in mind that if you're applying for scholarships, for example, the target score may be higher than just the admission score. So after you set your target score, the second step is to take a practice test. You can go on the ets.org website and you can download the Power Prep software. And you can take an online GRE practice test that's written directly by the test makers or the ETS. That will give you a great baseline score. So now that you have a target score, you use the baseline score to help you determine how far you are from your target score. Step 3 is based on your baseline score and your target score, determine what's the best method for you to prepare for the test. So there's different methods for preparing. For some of you, you may be very close to your target score, so simply purchasing an official GRE study guidebook and doing some self-study is just fine, and that can get you to your target score. For others of you, taking an online course, especially if you travel a lot, may be the best way to prepare for the exam. Others of you may prefer an in-person course, a chance for you to meet with an instructor and have a group of your peers that are also preparing for the test to come together. In-person courses are usually anywhere from 4 weeks to 8 weeks, usually in length. And then lastly, there's one-on-one coaching. That's where you're sitting down with someone one-on-one and you're helping, that person's helping you with specific areas of focus for yourself and mastering concepts that are important for tackling this exam. I will mention that MathSP offers the one-on-one coaching option as well as the in-person group option, small group option. So if you're interested in either one-on-one coaching for the GRE or the GMAT, as well as an in-person small group course, our group courses are 10 students or less, then you can certainly check out MathSP for additional help. Once you figure out the best way to prepare for the test, the next step is to choose a test date and to register for the test. Keep in mind that you may have to take this test more than once, and that's okay because most people do take it more than once. So if you have a certain deadline for your admissions, where your admissions needs to be completed by a certain deadline, make sure that you plan to take the test at least twice. For some people, you may need just once. For some people, you may need up to 3 times, 4 times. It really doesn't matter, but plan ahead so that you are starting to prepare for this test now if you're applying for, let's say, the February deadline or beyond that point. And once you have your test date and you register, then you want to create your study plan. And make sure your study plan is realistic. So that means setting realistic goals for yourself leading up into your test day, and planning around holidays that are coming up, planning around vacations or any major work events you have going on. Just setting your calendar and making sure that you have a goal for each day leading up into your designated test day. Really, really important that you do that. Now we're going to move to the quantitative part of our discussion today. And before we get into some sample questions, it's important for you to know the concepts that are tested on the GRE. So these are concepts that you probably learned in middle school and high school. Maybe you saw them also in college, but for some of you, probably most of you, it's been a long time since you've done these types of problems. So for example, exponent rules, you may be a little rusty on your exponent rules, or you may be a little rusty on your equations that deal with geometry. So it's important to know what's tested, but it's also important to know what's not tested. So there's no trigonometry on the GRE, there's no calculus on the GRE. Even though there is geometry, there's only a select amount of geometry on the GRE, so there's everything you learn in geometry class in 10th grade is not on the test. Just the things that I have listed here on the slide are on the test. So keep in mind of what's tested. The GRE is also heavy on data and analyzing data presented to you in tables and charts and graphs. So learning how to read a graph and a table is important, and those questions pertain usually to standard deviation or distribution or mean, median, mode, box plots, frequency charts, etc. So keep these concepts in mind, and we're going to turn now to some sample questions that all come from, once again, the official GRE study guide book. And this is the 3rd edition of the book. There's 2 prior editions, so if you have a prior edition, that's okay. But this is the book that we're dealing with today. So the first question that we're going to look at is a multiple choice question with one answer only. So you'll note that this comes from page 368 in the GRE book, and it's number 25. So I'll read the question, then I'll work it out with you guys. So the question reads, what is the perimeter in meters of a rectangular playground? So I like to start by drawing a rectangular playground. Okay, and it says the playground is 24 meters wide. So 24 meters wide. And it has the same area as another playground that's rectangular. So let's draw another playground that's rectangular. And this second rectangular playground is 64 meters long. So 64 meters long and 48 meters wide. 48 meters wide. So the question says that we need to find the perimeter of this rectangle. So perimeter equals what? And what we know is that the perimeter of this rectangle has the same area as the second rectangle. So first thing is, what is the equation for area of a rectangle? And hopefully you know the area of a rectangle is equal to the length times the width. So on your on-screen calculator, you can calculate 64 times 48, and the area will give us 64. The area of this rectangle is 3,072 square meters. So now that we know the area of this second rectangle, we know that's identical or equivalent to the area of the first rectangle. So if the area, once again, is length times width, we can plug in 3,072 for area. So 3,072 is 24 times the length. Okay, so now to find the length, we simply divide by 24, and doing that calculation on your calculator should give you 128 meters for the length. Okay, so now that we know the length of our first original playground, 128 meters, we're now ready to calculate our perimeter. And keep in mind, perimeter is the sum of all 4 sides. So we know that this side is 24 meters. We know this side is also 24 meters. And this side is also 128 meters. We can add up all 4 sides. And if we do that correctly, we should get a perimeter that's equal to 304 meters. Okay, so that means our answer to this question is choice E. Okay, so this is an example of multiple choice with one answer only. And obviously this question is testing you on certain concepts dealing with geometry. So area, perimeter, rectangles are the key concepts that we had to know for this particular question. All right, so moving on to our next question. Let me erase this one. Our next question is another multiple choice with one answer only, and it's on page 357, problem number 25. And the question reads, if 2x equals 3y, which is also equal to 4z, which is equal to 20, okay? The question is asking us, what is 12 times x times y times z? So what is 12 times x times y times z? What is that equal to? Okay, so essentially what we have here is three different equations. We have more than that, but we want to set 2x equal to 20, 3y equals to 20, and 4z equal to 20, so that we can solve for x, y, and z. So if 2x equals to 20, we can divide by 2, and so now we know the value of x is 10. If 3y equals 20, we can divide both sides by 3. And we know the value of y is 20 over 3. I'm just going to leave that as a fraction. And then lastly, if 4z equals 20, we can divide both sides by 4. And we know that z is equal to 5. So now we have the value of x, y, and z. We can plug it in, and we can solve for 12 times x times y times z. So if we were to plug it in, we would get 12 times x, which is 10, times y, which is 20 over 3, times z, which is 5. Okay, so we can use a calculator for this, but it's something we can also do by hand. We can divide first. 3 goes into 12 4 times, so that eliminates our denominator there. And now we can do really any order of operations we want, and we should end up with 4,000 as our answer for that, which is answer choice C on page 357. Okay, so those are two different examples of your traditional multiple choice questions with one response. Okay, so let's move on to our next question, which is a multiple choice question with one or more responses or answers. And this question is on page 366. And it's problem number 16. Okay. All right, 366, problem number 16. You'll notice also here that the answer choices A, B, and C have boxes around them, square boxes versus ovals. So whenever you see an answer choice that has a box like this one, that's the indication to you that this is choose one or more responses, versus the last two questions we did, the answer choices were ovals. And this is, it's not on our PowerPoint presentation, but in the book itself is how you'll see that you have boxes for this particular question, because this is a question where you can choose one or more answers. So the question reads, if integer v, so an integer is a whole number, positive or negative, including 0, the integer v is greater than 1, okay? So v is greater than 1, and v is an integer. It's important to note. If v is the square of an integer, okay, so let's think about that. V is the square of an integer. Okay, so let's just pick an integer. So let's say we have integer 2, for example. And then v will be the square of that. So v will equal the square of 2, which is 4. So 4 is an example of what v could equal. So if that was the case, that could be a potential value for v. If we had another integer 3, for example, the square of 3 is 9. So it's another example of what v could be. And the question says, if v is the square of an integer, which of the following numbers must also be the square of an integer? So which of these three choices must also be the square of an integer? Okay, So this is a great problem where we could do a strategy called picking a number. So literally picking a value for v, either 4 or 9 or any other value that works, and plugging it into our answer choices and seeing which one of the answer choices or one or more answer choices also is a square of an integer. So let's do that. So for choice A, it says 81v. Okay? So if we take our v to be 4, we're just going to choose this value for v because it's smaller. If we choose 4 for v, that's going to give us 81 times 4. And what we want to know is 81 times 4, which, if I do my math correctly, is 324. Is this number the square of an integer? Does that number have a square root that's an integer? And if you square root 324, you will find that the square root of 324 is 18. So, because 324 is the square of 18, choice A is one of our possible answers. So yes, A is correct. It is the square of an integer. So we're good with that one. If we move on to choice B, B says 25v plus 10, the square root of v, plus 1. Okay, so once again, the same strategy. We're going to take our value for v. We're going to plug in two different places here. So we have 25 times 4 plus 10 square root of 4 plus 1. So 25 times 4, we know that's 100. 100 plus the square root of 4 is 2. 2 times 10 is 20. Plus 1 is 121. And the square root of 121 is 11. So yes, 11 is the square of an integer. 121 is the square of an integer, is the square of 11. So therefore, choice B is also one of our possible answers. So far, A and B both work. So now we're going to try choice C. And I'm going to erase A for a moment. I'll just go ahead and mark that A also works. Okay, so now we're on choice C. I'll put it up here, which says 4v squared plus 4 square root of v plus 1. Okay, so again, our v is 4. So that's going to be 4 cubed plus 4 times 2, because the square root of 4 is 2, plus 1. So if we do that math, we will, let's do that on the calculator. We'll see that 4 squared is 64, plus 8 plus 1 is 73. 73 is not the square of an integer, so therefore C is not a possible answer. So our answer for this question would be just A and B and not C. Keep in mind, for when you have questions like this, there are more than one or more answers, you have to select all that apply in order to get full credit, or to get credit at all, really. So if you only chose A but not B, or B but not A, unfortunately you missed the question. You had to choose A and B to get the credit for the question. So if you chose A and C, even though you got A right, but you did not get C because C was not a choice, a correct response, then the whole question is marked wrong. Okay? All right, we're going to move on now to a different type of question. This one's numeric entry. We are on page 368, looking at problem number 24. And once again, I just want to let you know that we are using the official GRE study guidebook, 3rd edition. So this question says, of the 20 light bulbs in a box, 2 are defective. So right away, I know that I have defective and I have non-defective. If 2 are defective and there's 20 total, we know that 18 of them are non-defective. Okay? So of the 20 light bulbs total, we know that 2 are defective. An inspector will select 2 light bulbs simultaneously, so that's at the same time, and randomly from the box. So we're selecting 2 light bulbs. So light bulb number 1, light bulb number 2, okay? And we want to know the probability that neither of the light bulbs will be defective. So we do not want a defective light bulb. Okay, we do not want a defective light bulb. We want a non-defective light bulb. So the probability of me selecting the first light bulb that is non-defective is 18 out of 20, right? Because 18 total non-defective and there's 20 total light bulbs, which we can reduce this down to 9/10. Okay, now for the second light bulb, there's no longer 18 left to choose because we've taken one of those out. So there's 17 now total non-defective light bulbs. And the total number of light bulbs in total is no longer 20. Now it's 19. Okay, so it's important that you reduce the total number by 1 in order to pull when you're pulling your second light bulb. So now we have 17 over 19 as the second light bulb that we're pulling. So in order to calculate the probability that neither of these light bulbs will be defective, we have probability of number 1, of number 2, and now we multiply these together because we want this and this to happen. Whenever you want and or 2 things both to happen, we multiply because the chance of that happening is smaller than the chance of them happening individually. And we can use a calculator if we need to, but if we multiply 9 times 17, we should get 153, and 10 times 19, 190. So this will be our numeric entry response. We'll grid in 153 over 190 into our answer space here. So again, no answer choices here. You have to do the calculation and then put in your numeric entry. So that's how that question type looks. Moving on, we're going to look at a quantitative comparison question type. All right, so this is on page 355, and it's problem number 7. So the question starts off by letting us know that X is the set of all integers n. So X is a set. It's a set of all integers n that satisfy this inequality. 2 is less than or equal to n, which is less than or equal to 5. Okay? And n is in the absolute value. I don't want to forget that. So let's think about the possibilities for n. N could be 2, 3, 4, or 5, because if I put a 2 in here, that works out. 2 is less than or equal to 2, which is less than or equal to 5. 3 works, because 3 is between 2 and 5. 4 is between 2 and 5, and 5 is equal to 5. So those are 4 possible values for n. But because n is in the absolute value, we could also look at the negatives of those same 4 numbers. So -2, -3, -4, and -5 are also possibilities for n. If I plug in a -2, the absolute value of a -2 is a +2, right? Absolute value of a -3 is a +3. Absolute value of -4 is a +4. And of -5 is a +5. And the reason being is that absolute value is another word for distance. So it's asking what's the distance away from 0. Well, there's no such thing as a negative distance. So therefore, we won't have any negative values in absolute value terms. So here are possibilities for what n could be. Okay, and then we look at the 2 quantities they give us. So the quantity A says the absolute value of the greatest integer in x. Okay, so quantity A, QA, the greatest integer in x is 5. That's our greatest. An absolute value of 5 is 5. So QA would be 5. QB, quantity B says the absolute value of the least integer in x. The least integer in x is the -5. Okay, if we do the absolute value of -5, we also get 5. So what we see here is that the two quantities they give us in A and B are equal to each other. Because they're equal to each other, we choose answer choice C, because C means they're equal. Okay, choice A means that quantity A is bigger than B. Choice B means quantity B is bigger than A. Choice C means they're equal to each other. And choice D means there's not enough information. So here we see that the answer choice is C, they're equal to each other. The concepts we had to kind of use here are dealing with sets and integers and understanding what an integer is, inequalities, absolute value. So a couple different concepts that are intertwined in this problem. Let's look at another example of a quantitative comparison. And the next example comes from page 363. And this is problem number 5. 363, number 5. All right, so the question reads, 3 consecutive integers have a sum of negative 84. Okay, we have to understand a couple of things here. One, we know what an integer is. We know that's a whole number, positive or negative, including 0. But consecutive means in order. So if we have 3 consecutive integers, the first integer we can call x, okay? The second integer we can call x plus 1 because it's in order, so it's 1 after the previous one. And the third integer we can call x plus 2. So there are 3 consecutive integers. And it says the sum means to add them all together. So we added these 3 together. We get 3 x's plus 3. And so the sum equals negative 84. Okay, so now we have this equation that we can solve to find out x. And then we'll know all 3 integers. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we subtract 3 on both sides, we get 3x equals negative 87. If we divide by 3 on both sides, we'll get x is equal to negative, I believe, negative 19. No, negative 29. Negative 29. Okay, so that is the value for x. So we know this is negative 29. If we add 1, that's negative 28. Another one gives us negative 27. So those are the 3 values that add up to give us negative 84. So quantity A now says the least of the 3 integers. So QA will be the least of the 3. We know the least is the negative 29. Compare that to QB, which is negative 28. And now we see that B is greater than A, right? So our answer would be B. Negative 28 is greater than negative 29, so we choose choice B. Okay? So this question, quantitative comparison question, we had to understand integers, consecutive, what that meant, pertaining to integers. We had to translate that opening statement into an equation that we could solve. We had to first set up our problem knowing what consecutive meant so that we could come up with the equation, that we could translate it correctly. And then once we solved, it was pretty clear to see which choice was greater. Okay. We're going to turn our attention now to the verbal reasoning part of the test. We've done some sample quant questions. So now let's look at a couple sample verbal questions. And we'll start off with sentence equivalence. And this is on page 341 in your official GRE book. And the question here reads, during the opera's most famous aria, the tempo chosen by the orchestra's conductor seemed blank, without necessary relation to what had gone before. So in sentence equivalence, as a reminder, your job here is to choose 2 answer choices that give the sentence the same exact meaning. Okay, so you should be able to choose 2 words from this list of 6 words and insert those 2 words into the blank one at a time, and the sentence should have the same exact meaning with that word. So one of the strategies that we use is we think about what goes in the blank before we actually look at our choices. So we have A, B, C, D, E, and F. We want to first hide our choices with our hands. Okay, so block those answer choices for a moment and think about what you would insert into the blank. Now, what you insert into the blank could be an original term or phrase that you come up with, or it could be something taken directly from the sentence itself. So I'll read the sentence again. It says, during the opera's most famous aria, the tempo chosen by the orchestra's conductor seemed blank. The tempo seemed blank. Okay, without what comes next, we would really have no idea what to put in that blank. The tempo seemed fast, slow, happy, sad, confusing. We don't even know what goes in the blank. But what comes after the comma gives us the context clues. And you have to look for the context clues in the sentences to know how to complete the blank. So with the context, it says, without necessary relation to what had gone before. So we need a word that means no relation to what previously just happened. No relation. You could put in the blank. Another word I think about when I see no relation is kind of just random. Seemed random, without necessary relation to what had gone before. It was just random, or it was maybe even unpredictable. So think about a few different words or phrases that you would insert into the blank before you look at the choices, using your context clue. So now we'll look at our choices. Hopefully the choices will jump out right at you as to what fits the sentence best, which closely matches what you thought about. So we look at our choices now. We see the word arbitrary, ding, 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 because arbitrary means exactly what we said. It means random. It means unpredictable. So arbitrary is definitely one of our two words, but it has to have a pair. So hopefully we see another word that also means random or unpredictable, and capricious is that word that also means random, unpredictable, arbitrary. So those two words give the sentence the same exact meaning. If you look at the other four choices here, cautious does not fit. Cautious does not mean random. We can eliminate C. Compelling doesn't mean random. We can eliminate D. Exacting doesn't mean random or unpredictable. No. And meticulous also doesn't mean random or unpredictable. So we can be confident that our two choices here, arbitrary and capricious, are both the best two words for the sentence that give the sentence the same meaning. So sentence equivalence is really all about vocabulary. Obviously, you had to know what capricious meant in order to get this question right, or you had to deduce based on knowing that these four choices were wrong. So if you know that these four are wrong, but you didn't know what capricious meant, you could then back into, well, you know what, if it's not these four, I know it's A. I'm not quite sure about B, because I don't know what it means, but I know it's not these last four. Then that should then deduce you to choosing A and B versus choosing, any other choice. So kind of working backwards also helps with these vocabulary-based questions on the GRE part of the verbal section. All right, so let's move on to a text completion question type, and I picked one here that has two blanks. This is on page 335, and it's problem number 7. So once again, as a review, the text completion question types, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences. So it could be one simple sentence, or it could be a complex kind of paragraph. And you can have 1, 2, or 3 blanks. If you have 2 or 3 blanks, each blank has up to 3 choices. If it only has 1 blank, then you have 5 choices. So we have a 2 blanker here, and we have A, B, C, 3 choices here, and then D, E, F, 3 choices for the second blank. Sometimes it's easier to think of a word for the second blank first, and then the first blank. Sometimes the reverse, the first blank, then the second blank. The order that you kind of think about which blank to kind of give meaning first doesn't really matter. it just whatever makes more sense to you. So let's read the sentence together. So it says, the blank of Vladimir Nabokov, as one of North America's literary giants, keyword, he's a literary giant, has thrown spotlight on his peripheral activities and has thus served to blank his efforts as an amateur entomologist. There's a lot of keywords in this sentence, so we got to pay attention to these keywords. So this person is one of North America's literary giants. Okay, so when it comes to literature, this is a well-known guy. He's a literary giant. He's well-known. He's probably in the media a lot, or gets a lot of attention for his work. So we need to use a word for the first blank that means something like giant, right? He's huge literary person. He is a famous literary person. He's well known. Okay, so think of any word that you feel like correctly goes into that first blank. The giantness of Vladimir Nabokov as one of North America's literary giants, right? The notoriety, the status, right? All those kind of words could fit the first blank. Has thrown spotlight on his peripheral activities. So peripheral means his sideline activities, things he does in his free time, things that are more like hobbies. But because he's such a literary giant, now there's attention on what he does as hobbies, peripheral activities, and has thus served to blank his efforts as an amateur entomologist. So he's an amateur entomologist, amateur meaning, of course, that he's new to this field of study. Entomology is the study of insects, but that's really not important. But anyway, an amateur entomologist means that's just a hobby of his. He just has his hobby. It's nothing that he's well known for, but the spotlight is now thrown on this hobby, and it's made it come to light. So it's really highlighted. Could go here. So it's highlighted his efforts. It's brought attention to. His efforts as amateur entomologist. It has served to be more recognized. So again, several different words may come to your head as to what could fit the second blank. The key strategy, once again, is to think about what goes into two blanks before you look at the choices. So that way, when we look at the choices, if you see something that closely aligns with what you have chosen, you can be confident in your answer. So let's look at the first blank. We have three choices here. Stigmatization. A stigma is not the same thing as being a giant or huge or well-known. So we don't want stigmatization. Skipping B and going to C. Marginalization, marginalize. Again, to be marginalized is not to be famous or well-known or huge. So that doesn't work. So lionization is exactly what we want here, because lionization is to have great interest or importance, to be really important. Like a lion is like the king of the jungle. So lionization is a big word that means you are a giant. You are the king of the jungle. You are, of importance. So that definitely does fit the first blank. The other two choices don't fit at all. So again, by process of elimination, we knew it was B, but also knowing what lionization means, we're confident with that answer choice. So then our second blank, it says, has thrown spotlight on his peripheral activities and thus served to bring attention to or highlight or recognize his efforts as an amateur entomologist. So we look at our answer choices: foreground, transcend, obscure. Definitely not obscure, because that's the opposite of what we want. Transcend means to go past. So his recognizing his hobbies is not going past his status as a literary giant. So we don't want to transcend. But foreground works because it's bringing it to the foreground, it's bringing it to the attention of other people. So foreground fits that second blank. Once again, you could have done the second blank first and then the first blank second. The key also here is that you have to have gotten both choices, both words correct. If you only got B but you chose something other than D here, Unfortunately, there's no partial credit. You would have missed that problem. So make sure that you're careful when you're doing these types of questions so that you can get, the credit for answering the whole question correctly. Okay, so those were just two examples of the verbal section. The third part of the section that we didn't really talk about much was the reading comprehension. For the sake of time and for our format today, we can't really put a whole passage up and kind of talk through it. But keep in mind that this is a computer-based test. So whenever you study for this, you want to study from, do as much online practice as possible. If you're studying from the official GRE study guidebook, that's great. This is the recommended book, is the official guidebook. However, a tendency when you're doing something from a book is to highlight or circle or mark up the pages on the book. That's not realistic to the test format because the test is computer-based. So when you are doing your work from the book, just try your best not to mark up the page in the book, especially when it comes to the reading comprehension. You can't do that on the test. Instead, what you want to do is have a separate sheet of paper, and you want to jot some notes down as you're reading the passage. On the GRE, you can skip around and look at the questions ahead of time, so that may be a good strategy for you is to read the questions first. Each passage may have 3 or 4 or 5 questions, so if you want to skip and read all the questions first, that way you know what you're looking for as you read the passage. That's a great strategy. But just want to bring to your attention the idea that working from the book is not the same as working from the computer screen. So make sure you're doing both book work as well as the computer-based work on the Power Prep software. The last thing I want to talk about is, second to last thing I should say, is the study plan, study guide. So this is a sample study guide. And I know that it says GMAT study plan, but it really can follow along with the GRE or any other exam for that matter. But the key is to have a plan. More than anything, the key is to have a plan and to write it down. Not just in your head, but to write it down. So if you have, let's say, 31 days to prepare for this test, okay, then you want to have a 31-day plan where day 1 is today, and hopefully today you're taking your practice test to get your baseline score. You've done your research, you know your target score. You go online, you register for a test, etc. That's day 1. And then day 31 would be test day, okay? And you want to have figured out what your plan is starting today up until your test date, and you want to have every day scheduled out. Keep in mind you want to schedule in your practice tests. You want to have enough of those done so that you are, practice that 4-hour span of time, just being focused for 4 hours, no interruptions, no cell phone, no social media, no friends or family around for 4-hour block of time. So it's important to get that practice in, as well as practice from your official GRE book. The one thing I also want to point out on this study plan is that you use your official GRE study guide book as what kind of goes into your plan. So ideally, before you take your GRE, you've done this book cover to cover. You've done all the practice tests, all the sample questions. You read through the chapters that you felt like were more foreign to you. You've brushed up on all your math concepts. You've mastered strategies for the verbal concepts, the verbal questions. So just basically taking this book apart and creating a plan from the book. If you have another book or resource, that's fine too. I would use that in addition to using this one. This is sort of like the primary resource. Anything else on the shelf at Barnes & Noble or you find on Amazon is secondary to the official GRE, because these questions are retired GRE questions. They're more likely what you're going to be seeing on your real GRE. Okay, so have a plan. And then again, part of your plan is also thinking through what's the best way to prepare for the test. So to wrap up, I do want to remind you guys that MathSP is here for you. We are based in Atlanta, and we have, again, 2 options: the in-person small group courses that are actually held right here at Emory University on the campus. So that could be convenient for a lot of you to come to campus. And then the other option is one-on-one coaching that can really happen anywhere across Metro Atlanta area. We would meet in a coffee shop or a bookstore or a public library, somewhere convenient for you, versus the small group courses are right here on the Emory campus. All the information you need is here on the screen, so contact me or someone on my team. We would love to help you guys out in getting ready for your GMAT or your GRE. And speaking of the GMAT, we do have our next group course scheduled for the GMAT. It's scheduled to start in January, so I think it's the first week of January on a Thursday, whatever that Thursday date is. I think the 7th. but the Thursday date. So if you're interested in the GRE small group course, please check that out. Otherwise, if you're interested in the GRE group courses or one-on-one coaching, please give us a call or email and we can let you know, give you some details about that. So with that, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, this webinar, and I wish you guys all the best as you prepare for your GRE and or your GMAT. Thank you.